Welcome to the PharmaSource podcast. I'm joined today on the podcast by Daniel Hurni, who is Director of Manufacturing Network Strategy and Business Intelligence at BMS, Bristol Myers Squibb. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Look, happy to be here.
Likewise. Daniel, in your role, you're responsible for working on the overarching strategy around outsourcing across not just small molecules, but also biologics, cell and gene therapies. And it sounds like a really interesting role. So I'm quite keen to understand how that works and how you work across all these different stakeholders to come up with a strategy. But to begin with, let's talk about your career journey. Interested to know how you got started and what led you to where you are today.
Okay, sure. Let me give you the short version, right?
Sure.
I'm a chemical engineer by training. Later on did an MBA after having like 5-6 years of work experience. So naturally, I was close to pharma, but I actually started in a startup that did something completely different. They were supplying DVD dye in all of the world, and I'm mentioning it here because I traveled around the world for around 2.5 years after my studies. But brought me a very broad perspective of different cultures and personalities, characters, right?
That must have been fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I think a lot of people do travel after their studies for half a year or a couple of months. And I kind of had that in a work space. And so I was quite often I was in Brazil, Chile, Bulgaria. I was living in Moscow for a while, Germany, Spain. Right, so that gave me really a broad understanding of different cultures and work styles as well. So after that, but it was also pretty exhaustive, right? And I looked for something more stable and less like fluctuating. And so I came across a smaller company called Similazan here in Switzerland. They are a big manufacturer of FMCG, mainly eye drops in the OTC market. I started there as a quality engineer, but relatively quickly changed into project management, where I supported product development from ideation to launch, worked with marketing, commercial, and so I launched around like 25 different products into different markets, did a full rebranding of the company, supported that from a project management perspective. And then in the end, headed up operations and supply chain for that company. It's in entirety for around 4 years, right? And all summed up, I stayed around 10 years at that company doing different things. Was also kind of assigned as a troubleshooter to different things in this company, right? Whenever there was issues, led inspections and so on, because it was a pretty small company, around 150 people, and around maybe a third reporting to me at the time, 1/3 of the companies reporting to myself. I had a pretty big organization for the company, but the company itself was pretty small, right? And after 10 years, I knew everything around that company. I had a very broad experience, mainly around sterile manufacturing, also external manufacturing. And it happened that around 2014, BMS was decided to build a hub in Zug area with global capabilities. So I was one of within the first 10 people that joined that global capability hub that BMS was building, and helped building that hub as well. And I was hired in an external manufacturing function that's called Supply Relationship Manager, where I managed external partners all over the world, in South Korea, in Germany, managed in the beginning technical transfers to set these partners up, and then took over the commercial manufacturing relationship with these partners, and did it for quite a while in different functions, different constellations.
And how did you find that, going from a much smaller company to be part of BMS, albeit in a small office? How did you find that transition? Did you have to change the way that you worked?
Definitely two completely different worlds, let's say, right? And quite often people also ask me, what do you prefer, or what do you think is better? And I think there is no better or worse in this context. It's more different, right? And I think about the smaller company, we were a lot less risk averse, right? And with that, we were a lot more willing to take certain risks, sometimes even by the fact that we did not have the financial backup to invest to mitigate certain risks potentially, right? But a big company like BMS, we are a lot more risk averse and a lot more cautious about risk, a lot more transparent around risk and managing risk, but leads to a lot more investment in that areas as well. So from a professional level, let's say BMS is obviously a completely different animal than the small company, but vice versa, the smaller company was a lot more agile and capable of reacting to changes in the market a lot faster, right? But it was also needed because this was an OTC market, and BMS is more in the prescription medicine market or entirely, right? So you have a lot more steady state in the prescription market than in the OTC market, where you have like market fluctuations. A competitor falls out of the shelf, a Walmart or the CVS comes to you and say like, can I have next month another 100,000 units, right? It's different there. And when you can deliver, you're in. If not, then you're not in, right? It's about business or non-business, while in bigger companies, more about continuity of supply. And it's also, if you cannot supply a lot higher impact to the patient, right? And if you cannot an eye drop, if you're lacking cancer medicine, that's a lot bigger impact to patients' life. Right? And then 3.5 years ago, I joined the global manufacturing organization in manufacturing network strategy as a director. And now 1/2 year ago, I joined the global aspect of that, let's say, manufacturing network strategy in a GPS, global product development and supply function that is above the operating unit and is heavily collaborating with the operating and other units and other functions in order to break down the company strategy into manufacturing strategy.
Thank you for that. In your official job title, you've got Director GPS. What does a GPS stand for?
In BMS, GPS stands for Global Product Development and Supply. So it's the manufacturing organization together with the development organization. So under that falls biologics, pharma, cell therapy, but also the functions of global quality, supply chain, etc. Right? So all the supporting functions as well. So everything that has to do with manufacturing and development, process development, is summarized into that big global product development and supply function.
Thank you. Are there any particular moments or projects which you could call out as being significant and things that you've learned from? Interested in some of those key moments that's really shaped your career.
A couple of key moments were associated with technical transfer projects where these were new products. The supply plan was underestimated, right? When you launch new products, you have a high uncertainty about the forecast that you have. And if you find that the forecast at once explodes, right, you have like not only double, but 4 or 5x the volume you need, then this creates a big pressure on certain projects to be executed to access more capacity, right? And that's what I experienced in the external manufacturing world. Where there was high attention on certain technical transfer projects to deliver on time and in the quality to get the product or a new node approved. And this was definitely something that where I could lead a very skilled team, got a lot of resources also to get it done, to be honest, right? And so on one hand, it's a high pressure environment, but on the other hand, it's also you get everything, the best people the company has, the best resources you have, right? You don't have to ask twice for things because it's so important to the company and gives you a lot of spotlight, right? And so it was a lot of pressure, but also a lot of fun to do these projects. They gave to the team and myself also a big visibility in the company. And also I think a great opportunity to contribute to something bigger and let the brand grow and give patients more access to what we're doing in a quicker time frame than we normally used to operate in, right? So this is for sure one. Another one, I was in the incidents team when a storm hit Puerto Rico in 2017, right? Maybe you heard about that. It's we had several manufacturing sites there, and one site that was manufacturing products. I was managing the backup node from external manufacturing perspective, was hit. And so to be part of that and help mitigate the impact of that storm, there was a storm Maria in 2017 that hit the island pretty severely, was also one other thing that was very interesting to be part of and helping to mitigate the impact on the company and the patients.
What was your role within the business during COVID?
During COVID, I was already in the strategy function.
Mm-hmm.
I think COVID was challenging from a raw material component supply perspective, right? At once, everywhere, the capacity was lacking. There was Operation Warp Speed, where the US government kind of took capacity on the external landscape to manufacture COVID vaccines and gave them priority. So we faced certain impact by that as well, right? So there was a lot of mitigation strategies that we need to develop and mitigate potential supply disruptions. And there was a lot of micromanaging that. Luckily, we were, in my eyes, set up pretty well for an incident like that. We have our business continuity plans. We have our backup nodes for critical products, for example. So while it hit us too, I think we as a company managed that pretty well from a supply reliability perspective, right? We still struggle. We probably pressure tested our plans here and there where we need to be fitter in the future, because you can always have these backup plans and business continuity plans. Once the issue becomes real, even if you planned for it, you will see where you're lacking and where you're really prepared, right? And I think that's what happened with us as a company. But you asked the question about smaller company and bigger company, right? We in BMS, we had the plan, we executed the plan, we struggled here and there, but overall, I think we navigated it very well. I think a smaller company probably, or smaller companies in general, probably struggled a lot more with COVID than we did in the end.
Yeah, being a much smaller fish and less buying power, I suppose, being a challenge.
Yeah, I think, even that, as a big company, if the US government comes and takes your capacity, hey, right, what do you want to do, right? It does not have anything to do. Sometimes it's not money that buys your capacity. It's knowing where, how to improve processes, how to leverage your relationships with the suppliers, for example, how to increase and improve your internal manufacturing capacity, or maybe do things for a short amount of time that you would not do in a normal setup to put in the extra effort to grant continuity of supply, right? And it's all of that together. If there is no capacity, there is no capacity. No amount of money will buy you some, right? It's like if you want to buy something, it's just not available, then money doesn't play a role in that. It's other things that play a role.
We talk a lot on this podcast with people who are responsible for a selection of CMOs. And so we'll always talk about the importance of building relationships with your contract manufacturing partners and how to work with them effectively. Given your role in entire networks, I'm interested in hearing from your perspective, what are the challenges which you'd say are unique perhaps to managing a network of CDMOs versus a sort of a one-to-one relationship? Maybe it's a question about why is a role like yours necessary to do this network strategy piece versus the individual business units just having their own relationships?
Yeah. So first, I want to say, right, I'm not the only one doing that, right? In BMS, right? Strategy is a very big topic, right? And you have that in different levels and different views. But when it comes to relationship management, these have quite often the characteristic of day-to-day operations, right? You manage the manufacturing, you're getting your batches released, you're making sure that the quality concerns or deviations are addressed, right? You're negotiating the contract. But when it comes to the long-term view and the network view, there's also always a question of BMS, for example, has very big brands, right? And so you want to have business continuity. So it's always a question, where we do what? Do we want to have redundancy in our supply chain? If yes, how much are we giving external, internal, or do we want to have even two sides doing internal the same thing or external, right? All of these questions, they need to be solved. And this is normally not something, given the technical transfer takes you around 3 years at least, right? This is not something you can solve on the operational level. You solve that on a 8 to 10-year horizon. When you look into the product life cycle of a brand. And then I give you one example, right? Let's say you have a $5 billion brand that is manufactured in one particular plant, right? You say like, I have redundancy, I have an external partner who's doing the same. Then you have another $5 billion brand who's doing actually the same, right? If you have an incidence in one location, you're impacting two brands. So when you're doing brand strategy, you don't ultimately see the interconnectivity between different brands that access similar capacity or or the same lines in the same CMOs or the same internal manufacturing landscape. So there is a need to connect the dots, right, and see that from an overall capacity network standpoint, how the different brands are developing in terms of volume and what level of capacity you as a company need to support all of these volumes, and to also see to what level you can support this capacity. Because normally you have an assumption of a long-term supply plan, but then we all know telling the future is difficult, right? Especially if you don't have a crystal ball, and the forecasts are never right. So you want to make sure that if there is upside demands, that you still can deliver without generating too much cost with having like idle capacity. But then on the other hand, you also want to make sure that if it's less than what you thought, that you're not running into huge capacity commitments or costs by idle capacity. So there is always this play of having a long-term view that gives you enough agility, upside and downside, to manufacture and supply whatever comes along your way. With regards to external manufacturing, we're having in BMS a tier system, and we are having identified certain strategic partners. And with these strategic partners, we're also sharing our long-term view, because there it's not only about manufacturing the product, it's also about building the capabilities and the capacities that we need in the future. So we go there and we tell our external manufacturing partners, the suppliers, that's our plan. Where do you think you could contribute? And so it's kind of an iterative process. So we learn about what suppliers can do. Based on that, we develop the plans, and vice versa. What we need, we bring that all together and see like, how can we create a balance between internal and external manufacturing that makes sense from a strategic perspective.
That long-term view, is that 8 to 10-year horizon typical, would you say, when you're doing your long-term planning? How far out do you look?
Yeah, I would say that's pretty typical, that we're looking around 10 years out. There are some conversations that are maybe even longer term. I don't think companies in general are yet prepared for these very long-term discussions, right? I think when you think about raising sea levels, right, for example, where will the land be in 100 years, right? Nobody's talking about that, I feel. But I think there is some value in trending long-term developments too, like maybe not 100-year time horizons, but maybe 20-year time horizons, right? But from a supply perspective, the longer out you look, the more inaccurate your data is becoming. So at a certain moment in time, it doesn't make really sense to predict anymore where you will be, because you know that the variability of the data is very, very high. But then there are certainly certain industry trends that are longer term that you can account for when doing 10, 15-year outlooks, right? Technology developments, for example, especially, for example, in the cell therapy space, where is it going there? It's an area where it's very highly manual, that is going to be more automated, for example. It's kind of a clear industry trend that you can follow.
For something like cell and gene therapy, how do you even put that kind of forecast together? Because it's at such an early stage. It must be very hard to predict what the demand's going to be.
It's actually the opposite.
Oh.
For cell and gene therapy, it's not around the demand, it's more about the capacity. Cell and gene therapy is restricted by what you can make, not what the demand is.
Okay.
So there is a lot more patients than you can serve in cell and gene, and it comes together with the capacity constraints you have with a highly manual process, right? A labor-intense process. And I think there is going to be a while till we are capable of really meeting the true demand by having unconstrained capacity, right? That's why we're building all of these big facilities, why we're driving automation in that field, or the whole industry is driving automation in that field, because we want to lift that capacity constraint and the high cost and reduce the high cost of these therapies at the moment. So it's literally like constraint at the moment. That's what I would see. While in the other areas, pharma and bio, you're mainly unconstrained if you want to be unconstrained. In cell therapy, it's not that easy.
What kind of scenarios do you need to build into these? Do you scenario plan for another pandemic, natural disasters? How do you think about that?
So we're having a so-called enterprise risk management system, like IRM, integrated risk management system, where we capture all the different risks that we identify in the company, right? So it's not only potential BCM events. What you just mentioned are BCM events. So we call it PCM events, right? That's business continuity management. So what do we do if the Suez channel is blocked again, right? This type of scenario. What if another pandemic comes? What if you lose a site to whatever reason, fire, flood, snow, like everything, right? So you have this on different levels. You have that on global scale. You have that on a site scale. You have scenarios that you need to prepare for. And so critical there is the so-called recovery time. So whatever scenario you have, like how much time does it take you to come back into operations? And you can mitigate that with different levers. You can, for example, build stock to cover till you come back online with manufacturing side, or you can build in certain flexibility, or you can build redundancy. So there are a couple of mitigation strategies. So this definitely influences the manufacturing network strategy, right? We see like to what level, and there are clearly defined levels that we want to accept and that we don't want to accept, and where we want to build redundancies, or we want to build backup plans and invest into backup plans to create the business continuity. But on the other hand, there are not only risks, there are also opportunities. And these opportunities are, for example, new technologies. This is like new know-how. This is, for example, digitalization, right? And we need also to account not only for the risks, we also need to account for, we want to invest into the right technology at the right time, into the right know-how at the right time, to be at the forefront when we manufacture. And this is also needs also to be considered when we do manufacturing network strategy, right? To be on a level or be in the right fields when the fields mature and actually start creating value in the right way. And I pick maybe digitalization as a particular opportunity and challenge at the same time, right? Because I think digitalization has a huge opportunity. Also, AI has huge opportunities. At the same time, it's like when you, how we say that, when the only thing that you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So we kind of should not think around digitalization of how are we going to implement it. We should see it more like it's one potential solution. Does it make sense for this particular challenge? Rather than say like, let's implement AI, let's implement digitalization, and then look for the problems. We should more look like what's our challenges as a manufacturing organization, and where can we leverage these new technologies to actually create the value that they promise. And I see that a bit in the industry, that people approach it from my perspective, and that's my opinion, right? A bit the wrong way, in the sense of we are implementing AI, we are implementing digitalization, but then we're not clear what value it really generates, and potentially creates more work than benefit in the end.
And presumably you have to be, from a BMS side, you'd have to be ready to pull in all of that data and make sense of it. So it's not about just the data, which is within the contract manufacturer. Would your systems be ready to start pulling in real-time CMC data?
Oh, we're having very skilled people in BMS who do that, right? Who can build systems, who can build interfaces. I think it's less the capability of bringing in data. It's more the side of when you work with different contract manufacturers, for example, or different stakeholders, the data is in different systems. It's in different forms, right, to align. I think when it comes to data exchange, an industry standard would be probably very helpful, right?
Yes, yeah.
And that's one side of the challenge. Another side of the challenge is the contractual framework, right? How are you going to capture that contractually? Because there are potentially confidential information that is shared between two companies, and you need to make sure that it's safe, that the data is not misused or going into the wrong direction, and even you need to be willing to do that and invest into the systems on both sides in order to have that. So, and then there is also this other threat that comes with digitalization, and that's cybersecurity. So to what extent do you want to open your systems to manipulation or potential cybersecurity threats that can introduce by opening your system? So is a lot of questions around that particular topic. Nevertheless, I think when you ask people from the industry, everybody will tell you it's where it's going, right? How to do that best. I think nobody really figured it out yet, in my eyes.
When you're tiering suppliers, as you mentioned, a tiering system with strategic partners, would it be helpful if they're at least trying to align their roadmap for digitization with you, trying to work with you? Would that help them become a tier one partner?
I think it's a topic that we need to discuss with our suppliers, definitely. I don't think it's the deal breaker whether or not somebody becomes a strategic partner for BMS. It's more the capability, the capacity, the long-term relationship, the willingness to work together, right? So it's it's less the capability, like the capability that you need to build, right? If we have a long-term strategic partnerships and that's the way we want to go, then we are willing to have the conversation and build that whenever it's needed to make it work, right? It's not that you need to have that in order to do business with BMS, for example.
Yeah. When you're thinking about the network strategy, you're thinking about the small specialist contract manufacturers, which I'm sure every business unit has their own preferred suppliers that they work with. Maybe there's larger, more generalist suppliers who you can have longer term strategic relationships with. And then, of course, you've got the in-house. Is there an ideal number of strategic partners you'd want to work with? Would it be better to have fewer specialists? What's the overall direction?
That's a tricky question because it depends in the end from your needs, right? You have, for example, you have a pipeline that you want to commercialize. Then if you have a new technology that you don't have in-house, you go probably to one big strategic partner where you can develop your assets and commercialize them on the technology that you don't have, right? But then you have, like, for example, mainly in the pharma small molecules area, you have like a ton of legacy products, mature products that are already off patent, for example, that you need to manage, where it's probably more around securing the continuity of supply, making sure that the cost is in line, right? And it is less about bringing the products as fast as possible to the market. So, it depends on the product portfolio you talk about. It depends on the maturity of the product portfolio as well. And it depends on certain life cycles of certain product groups as well, what you're looking for. So it can change. Sometimes it's the big players in the CMO space. The benefit of them is that they can cover end to end. They can cover from the development cycle to the high volumes to the small volumes, because they have all of this end-to-end capability. That makes them a great kind of long-term partner. They have also all of the requirements that we have around business continuity, right? They're making their thoughts about digitalization, where smaller players may not have the financial breadth to invest to the same level as big ones, maybe serve one certain niche area, right? But I will not disqualify it because of that smaller players, because they can sometimes be very agile in certain spaces, and depending on the product portfolio, the product you have, that's probably what is required. So I think in the industry there is a tendency to go to less suppliers, to reduce the complexity overall, to give you a clear answer. But then there will always be a space for smaller, highly specialized CMOs or CDMOs that fulfill their role in a certain niche, I would say.
Thank you. It strikes me that your role must work with many, many different internal stakeholders to get results, working across various different business units. I'd be really interested in hearing from you, Daniel, about the kind of guidelines or operating structures that you've learned or created to be effective.
Yeah, it's indeed a challenge, the broad variety of stakeholders. I think it's a challenge that a matrix organization per se brings, because it's highly networked organizationally wise. What brings the benefit of having many perspectives when you look into strategic questions, right? You have the supply chain view, the quality view, the business continuity view, finance, etc., operations. What brings at the same time a certain level of challenge as well to align. What we use quite often is that we are generating a set of guiding principles that help us, like a North Star, in what direction do we want to go. We are clearly defining our strategic imperatives, what's like a must-have, what's a nice-to-have, how are we rating different parameters when it comes to network strategy. That kind of takes away the necessity to always discuss the basics, let's say, of a strategic direction, right? But still, there are different opinions on what is the priority, maybe around what strategic guiding principle for what particular strategic question. So I think there is a big need for communication, a big need for transparency, and a big need for taking data-driven decisions. And we in BMS, we are driven to create data-driven decision-making by presenting to our leadership team when we go with different scenarios or different pathways we can go down, backing that up clearly with data that is provided from the different functional areas, that we have all the data at hand when we take strategic decisions, to be sure that at this moment in time when we take this decision, we are as informed as we can be. There is maybe one part that we in BMS begin to be more cautious about or pay more attention to, and that's a bit the outside-in view. I think in general, bigger companies tend to be busy with themselves and look like what we need, what we want, right? And there is some value in having an outside-in perspective and looking like, what are industry trends, what technology is out there, where is it going, and take that into consideration, as well as only what we want, where we want to go and look like, and what's out there too, and consider that too when we do decision making. And I'm very happy to see that in BMS we're having that view too, that we're not getting like kind of arrowed in on our path with our opinions, our view of the world, that we also consider the outside-in view. What's the industry doing with this particular problem, right? For example, sometimes you can have information freely available on the internet that you should consider when doing business, for example.
Do you ever look at other industries, automotive, for example, how they manage their supply chains, or FMCG?
Yeah, we do. We do sometimes look like what is best in class when it comes to manufacturing, for example. I think we need to be very careful. That again is my personal opinion. But for example, like 10 years ago, even before I joined BMS, just in time was the big thing that was coming to the automotive industry, right? And it's about having a very lean, very integrated supply chain, have your suppliers very much integrated in your manufacturing sites and so on, and deliver just in time, having almost no stock. And what happened now during, for example, the pandemic is all of these car manufacturers, they could not deliver their cars anymore, right? While it's probably really a pain to wait 2-3 months for your car, it's a decision around life or death if somebody doesn't get his or her cancer treatment, right? So I think we need to look at that from an industry need perspective as well, not only from a different industry perspective. What's the potential impact and what level of risk you really want to take with different approaches? So definitely we can learn from other industries. For example, I did when I was managing external suppliers, I went with my virtual plant team to a food manufacturing company.
Interesting.
I had a personal good relationship to the COO. We went there, he explained us their processes, how fast they are with releases, how fast they can react to market demands, right? And they have shorter shelf lives even than we have in the pharmaceutical industry for sweets, right? And so it was very insightful for them to see how it can work, what we can potentially translate in our BMS supplier relationship to improve things. So definitely there is the possibility to learn from other industries, but then we also always should think about how does that reflect back on our needs, how does that reflect back on our risk profile, and balance the benefits with the risks that we potentially take by going other ways. But in any case, I think it's good to have new inputs and to create innovation, even in the manufacturing environment that we have in the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, I think it's always fascinating to see how other people in other industries are trying to solve similar sorts of problems.
Yeah, definitely.
I wonder if you could share any advice for someone who's taking their first steps of going into network strategy. How would you get started? Maybe they've opened up Excel and they've just got nothing but empty cells. Let's say the company hasn't done it before. How would you get started as network strategy?
The network strategy should not be seen as a silo within the company. The manufacturing network strategy should be connected somehow to your company strategy. So before you can really start doing your network strategy, you need to understand where is the company as such going. What are new products to be launched? How does your pipeline look like? What are the demand profiles you need? What are the capabilities also that you need? Not only the capacity, also the capability. Then probably there's also some value in looking back and see like how did the certain KPIs trend in the past, and how does that reflect into the future? How what can you learn from the past too, right? What is potentially a pain point that you want to solve for? So yeah, you have your risk maps, you have your KPIs. So kind of do like the buffet of everything that is there together with the company strategy. How does the plate needs to look like in the end, where you want to go, right? The cost and so on. And then create like the pathway to the future and see like, if we do this and this and this activities, then we will land there, and that will create us the competitive advantage for the company in the future to be there as a manufacturing organization to contribute to the overall company success and the continuity of supply. I think that's a lot easier to be done in a smaller company because the ways are very short, right? You are very much more connected to the different functions, and also to functions like marketing, sales, development, R&D, and so on. Then in bigger companies, you're almost overwhelmed with data sometimes, where you need to select what is really relevant for this question and what is not. So short answer maybe for you, when you start new, put all the relevant data on the table, have an understanding of the company strategy, and then connect what is it that manufacturing needs to do in order to make the company strategy successful, right? And but that's what we are doing with guiding principle. We're connecting them to the company strategy and to break them down and give a path for manufacturing strategy and say like, if we do this and this and this, and we follow this criteria, then we are contributing positively to the company strategy and the success of the company as overall, right?
Very interesting, Daniel. Thank you. Would you recommend working in life sciences to someone coming out of university?
Absolutely. I think life sciences and biopharmaceutical industry is a very exciting field, right? You're feeling like every day you're helping developing, you're helping bringing the medicines to the patients. And I think what better cause can you have? So if you have a helper syndrome like myself, kind of, you're kind of prone to this type of industry because you always want to make it work, you want to progress. I would definitely recommend for anybody interested and coming out of studies to go into that. I think it's, on the flip side, sometimes very difficult to do so. I was attending a couple of career days here in Switzerland at the ETH, University of Zurich, and people coming out of studies, they have sometimes very high expectations. Now I did my PhD, I did my master's degree, and I'm coming here and I'm going to manage a team, right? But then you see, like in the pharmaceutical industry, you kind of have most of the time a slow start. You go as a trainee somewhere, you need to have a foot in the door. It's becoming, mainly in the earlier years, difficult to get a hold on a role, right? And then grow from there. I think once you have a couple of years of pharmaceutical or biopharmaceutical experience, it's getting a lot easier to switch. But the entry into the industry is still pretty hard, and it's sometimes frustrating for people coming out of the university, I feel.
Fascinating. Daniel, thank you so much.
No problem. It was great to talk to you, Luke. It was a very interesting conversation.
To keep up to date with the latest in biopharma outsourcing, sign up to pharmasource.global. Thank you for listening.